my last conversation with 𝗪𝗘𝗧, we covered some of the political and military times of the 1960s surrounding a secret mission to send human beings to a distant planet as part of an exchange program. In this talk, Lynn discusses the mission itself and what the exchange was about. They gave us technology. I don't know what we gave them, but we will find out. Let's talk about the setting up of the people to go to it. We talked about it a little bit last time. Now, December 1963, Los Alamos received a message from the Ebens about their landing on Earth. This was just weeks after Kennedy's death, as I recall. Was it just after or just before Kennedy's
No, the
death?
exchange program was set up in the 50s.
Yes, but I'm talking about that communication in the 60s that came through.
Yes, yes. Kennedy was briefed on it by the CIA and in the early 60s when he took over, and then he approved it. Naturally, he wanted a space triumph desperately after Sputnik. And it had already asked von Braun when we could send somebody to the moon and do something on the moon. And Lyndon Johnson was brought in on it because Kennedy had made him the space council head.
After Kennedy's death, he was brought in.
No,
right?
no, Kennedy had appointed him as head of the space council.
But he didn't know about the project.
He did not know about the
right,
project.
Right. Okay, so there we are. And now, April 24th, 1964. Two craft landed near Serpo. Let's start there. What happened after that?
No, the first craft, they sent two craft into our atmosphere, April 24th, 1964. One of them, the first one, went to the wrong place. It landed outside of Corona. Was it Corona? I believe it was Corona, New Mexico. It was about 100 miles away from where it was
Slightly
headed.
off target, yeah.
And do you know anything about the 𝗪𝗘𝗦𝗬𝗧 case?
No.
You know that a New Mexico policeman was called on an emergency call because an alien craft had landed near Corona, New Mexico. His name was Patrolman Lonnie Zamora. And
it's coming back. I've read bits about it. Yes, go ahead.
And the date was April 24th, 1964.
Okay.
That was the alien craft that missed the landing place. And what he encountered was two aliens standing outside the craft, which he said was egg-shaped and very large, very large.
Yeah.
And then when they saw him, they scrambled and got back in and took off. That was the one that was supposed to have landed at Holloman Air Force Base and missed it. But then we sent a message to that craft. They eventually found the right place. But see how that Zamora incident ties in with Serpo.
Yes. Okay. So once the contact was made, now this is 1964. Tell us about some of the prep and how they were kind of managing the logistics for this operation.
Oh, in terms of training the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they put an ad in many military journals asking for volunteers. Didn't tell them anything about it, just that it was a dangerous mission, and they got 600 replies, and they eventually narrowed it down to 16.
And these guys...
And some of them, and there were two women in the original cut.
But not in the final.
Not in the
12.
final.
There was some misunderstanding about that.
Not in the final cut.
Okay, and now they were taken to the hospitable quarters of Fort Leavenworth prison, right?
The security was so fanatical and so compartmentalized that the DIA didn't want to risk, who was in charge of the program, did not want to risk any possibility of it leaking out, to the point where they didn't want people with families, they didn't want people with children, they didn't want people they wanted them to be orphans themselves. And these men were going to be gone for 10 years, don't forget, so they were concerned. And so they selected them very carefully. A guy from MI6 in England was a part of this program, and he sent in a letter to the website saying that they had trouble filling all the 12 positions with the right categories, physicians, scientists. They had to actually go out and recruit a couple of them. They couldn't find them all within the military community. They did have to go out and recruit some of them.
So they have their final 16. And how were they trained? How does one train for going into outer space and then living on a foreign planet that really we have no knowledge of?
Well, we already had NASA at that point. They were supposedly in charge of anything to do with outer space, but they were not involved in this program at all.
Right.
They did get involved in the training.
Yeah.
These men were not trained as astronauts.
So let's talk about what their actual training
They
was
were
like.
given, subject matter was very wide. everything you can think of. Astronomy, everything that they thought they might need to know was covered. And many of the people that trained them did come forward later and send in anonymous submissions to the website. And that really helped to flesh out the information on the Serpo website. But they were sent to Fort Peary, Virginia, which was the CIA training facility, commonly known as the Farm. In any case, they had their own facility within the Farm. And so they were in a separate, even more secure location. And that's where they were trained mainly. But they were also sent to foreign countries for training, Chile, Mexico, and they were sent to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida for the high altitude training. So they got a very wide kind of training for this.
But what was the training like for their physical bodies?
We knew they had the right kind of atmosphere. We knew they had carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, just like we do. We knew that already. Don't forget, we had been dealing with them for 9 years prior to Kennedy's advent. So we knew a lot. We had volumes of information about their planet they'd already given us. They did send the 4 aliens with the craft to help us back engineer the craft. So presumably we knew a lot about them, even though we couldn't communicate fluently with them. First landing in April, as we discussed, April 24th, 1964, they decided they didn't want to take the 12 people with them at that time. We greeted them with a greeting party of 16 officials from the government. I don't believe that President Johnson was among them. The 16 people have not been identified, but they were high officials in military and intelligence community, and probably MJ-12. That's my guess, I'm sure. And I think possibly Anonymous was one of them. In any case, they presented us with 2 gifts. One was an automatic translator that we could type into, and we could see their language on it, and they could see our language, and they could communicate that way. They brought those with them. They also presented us with a gift to the people of Earth called the Yellow Book.
Yes.
The Yellow Book was an amazing piece of technology that wasn't really a book. It was maybe, it looked like a book, but really as you opened it, images sprang out of it, holographic images of what you were looking at, and giving you pictures that were of historical significance going back to 2000 BC.
I loved the description of this. And this particular piece of technology, does it exist today? Does the military still have?
Yes, they have it, of course.
And does it show into the future as well, or only the past?
As far as I know, it just discussed the past. But the remarkable thing about the book was that when you held it close to you, it picked up the language that was in your aura, and communicated with you in that language. And it supposedly had 80 different languages encoded into it. So if you thought in terms of English, you would read English.
That's a beautiful gift.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, so now at what point, now 1964, they decided not to take them with them at this time, so then what happened?
They took the 11 bodies of the Ebens that had died here. There were 6 in the second crash. The Roswell crash was actually a collision between 2 of their craft. They were both identical in terms of the same race. When Reagan was briefed on it, they told him that they were the same exact race from both crashes. One crashed near 𝗪𝗕𝗓, New Mexico, and the other one crashed outside of Socorro. And that was the one we recovered. And there were 6 on the one from 𝗪𝗕𝗓. There were 4 dead aliens at Socorro and 1 live one. So they took back a total of 11 bodies with them on that landing of April.
And were they stored in the way that Corso mentioned, where they were suspended in some kind of fluid to keep them from degenerating?
Yes. At that time, Los Alamos had developed a cryogenic facility to preserve bodies indefinitely. That was involved with cooling, I guess, supercooling, I'm not sure what. But we had also autopsied several of them.
So the film Alien Autopsy, the most well-known film called Alien Autopsy?
The Alien Autopsy film was based on the crash that occurred before Roswell. Those aliens were different. They had 6 fingers and toes. They looked more human than the Ebens did.
The media has poo-pooed this. It's been...
The autopsy, yes, that autopsy film was the real thing. And I think that the guy that briefed President Reagan said that. He verified that. He validated that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've taken their bodies back with them. And what is the plan to return and pick up the
They said
humans?
they would come back in a year.
Mm-hmm. And what happened to this crew? They'd been trained already.
It was an enormous logistics problem for us because we had 40 tons of equipment sitting there waiting to be loaded onto the alien craft, including 3 Jeeps, 10 motorcycles, an incredible amount of stuff. And all that had to be warehoused now. And 12 Americans were sitting in a bus waiting, and they were told they had to go back to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which was a prison,
right?
And wait there so they wouldn't be able to contact anybody. And we treated them like prisoners, basically.
The ships finally did come. And let's talk about the ships, what happened when they landed, the crew, and then just going on board, kind of getting comfortable.
Right, and what was amazing about that, when the ship finally arrived in July, I think it was 16th of 1965, this one landed at the Nevada test site, not at Holloman. The first one was at Holloman, was actually on the border of Holloman and White Sands Proving Ground.
Okay.
The second one came directly to the Nevada test site, which is right near Area 51. They wanted to be near Area 51. At that time, Area 51 did exist. That one landed there, and much like in the movie Close Encounters, the 12 men were taken on board at that point. And what was amazing about that was that the craft was large enough to take the 40 tons. The shuttlecraft that landed was large enough to take the 40 tons of equipment, but they took it all in one move. So evidently they had anti-gravity technology.
Apparently, yeah.
In effect, they were able to, it was all on one platform, all of it.
Yes, that was shocking.
10 motorbike.
And all their food and supplies.
Food and everything, yes. All went on in one smooth move.
So their cargo's on board, the people are on board. What was the first experience in terms of the chain of command? Who were the beings that greeted them, and what was that experience like for them?
Yes, well, of course, they still couldn't communicate language-wise, but they did have somebody designated as a communicator.
A female, right?
A female, they call EV number 2. She spoke English pretty well. Evidently, her vocal cords were okay to speak the language. We found out they had certain people on Serpo that could also speak English, but they were mainly mainly doctors and people who were in the educated bracket. And
this female really was to remain their very close ally and companion, more than just a translator. It seemed the way she was depicted was she was quite compassionate and open with them.
And the commander was very taken with her. He was very pleased that she was so compassionate and so caring. She was like a combination hostess, translator, guide, all of those things wrapped into one. And she was the one that had translated that portion of the Yellow Book to English. She was the one that did that. So
Eben 2.
Eben number 2. And the 12 men got on board the shuttlecraft, and they were taken in, they were put in bubbles. Well, that portion of the trip, they weren't in the bubbles yet. They were taken to the mothership in the shuttlecraft, which was very large in itself, by the way. And that was the one that had landed at the Zamora incident.
Okay.
And if you look at paintings of that incident, that craft doesn't appear to be especially large, but it was large enough to take the 40 tons of equipment with it. And but when they got to the mothership, they were astounded because the commander said in his diary that he was standing in a room with a ceiling that was about 100 feet high.
If you liked this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.